Yeah. Do you still love Margot, Philip? Sue, you asked him a question.
Do you want to come on TV again, Philip?
Yes, still there.
Give us one more rap for goodbye.
Say goodbye to Alan.
A real loud one.
Louder than that. He's saying no. He doesn't want to go.
Never mind. Give us one rap, Philip.
Have you ever heard the saying, where attention goes, energy flows? What if this could be applied to ghosts? This saying is meant to be sort of an inspirational, metaphysical quote, but what if it's actually a law of the universe and manifests in ways we never thought possible? In the early 1970s, a group of researchers in Toronto set out to prove that ghosts were all in our heads, and that hauntings were nothing more than projections of the human mind, a belief system of the collective that manifests into our reality. But what these researchers ended up doing was far stranger than they ever expected. They created a ghost, and then they lost control of it. This is the story of the Philip experiment, an experiment that began as a test of psychology and ended as evidence that our thoughts might be able to shape reality itself. Hello, and welcome back to Wicked Mysterious. My name is Danny, and I explore all kinds of mysteries, from aliens to paranormal stories to unexplained phenomena. And today I have the latter for you. I don't cover a whole lot of paranormal stories in the sense of ghosts or hauntings, but this one kind of gets into the consciousness territory, and it's one of the most fascinating experiences that I've stumbled upon. If you'd like to support this show, check out my website in the description box below. I have downloadable guides in my shop, course waitlists, spiritual life coaching appointments with me, and ebooks, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Or you can join as a member on Patreon or YouTube and get early access to episodes. So with all that out of the way, let's get to today's mystery. This story begins in 1972. The Toronto Society for Psychical Research, or the TSPR, met regularly to investigate psychic phenomena, hauntings, and telepathy. They were a group of very well-educated, level-headed people who wanted to understand the paranormal through structured scientific research. Leading this project was Dr. A.R. George Owen. Before emigrating to Canada, Owen had lectured in genetics and mathematics at Cambridge University. A true scientist by all accounts, he was rational and meticulous, not the type you'd expect to be leading seances. His wife Iris, on the other hand, wasn't an academic, but she had a deep interest in understanding human consciousness. Together, they wanted to find out whether ghosts were external entities or made-up projections of the human mind. Their hypothesis was that if ghosts were really products of a human belief, then maybe a group of people could create one. Not just tell a story about a ghost, but actually manifest one through collective imagination. So Owen recruited a small team of 4 men and 4 women. None of them were psychics or mediums. They were just regular, everyday people. One was a book designer, another was an accountant, there was a housewife, a student, an industrial designer, and a sociologist. They were an unremarkable group of ordinary adults. Their task was to invent a completely fictional person, a ghost they all agreed to believe in, and that's how Philip Aylesford was born. Philip's life story was carefully written out, right down to the smallest details. He was said to live in the 1600s. He was an English nobleman, handsome and intelligent. He was married to a cold, cruel wife named Dorothea, and like all juicy drama stories, his downfall began with forbidden love. Philip met a young Romani girl named Margot and fell deeply in love, but when Dorothea discovered their affair, she accused Margot of witchcraft. Margot was condemned and burned at the stake, and Philip did nothing to stop it. Crushed by the guilt and the loss of his one true love, he took his own life by throwing himself into the battlements of his castle. None of this, of course, was real. Philip Aylesford never existed, but the group treated him like he did. They memorized his story, talked about him as if they'd known him personally, and even created a portrait so they could all visualize the same man. Then they started the seances. They met weekly in a small, softly lit room seated around a table. They'd focus together, calling out to Philip, asking him to make his presence known. For months, nothing happened. But after about a year of steady effort, something changed. They started a new approach that seemed to shift the results. Instead of a formal meditation, they made the sessions more relaxed. They dimmed the lights, added candles, played music from Philip's supposed era, and even laughed and joked as they worked. That's when the knocking started. At first, it was faint raps on the table, soft enough that you could convince yourself maybe it was something else or you imagined it. But the knocks became stronger and more deliberate. The group would ask a question and something would answer, one knock for yes and two for no. They called out to Philip and he responded. The group said that the air felt charged, like electricity running through the room. Others said the table would tilt on one leg or slide across the floor on its own. There were moments when a cool breeze would pass through, even though the windows were closed. Eventually, the table would even jump, just a few inches off the floor, as if someone had smacked it from below. There were always skeptics in the room, but even they couldn't deny that something physical was actually happening. They could all hear it and they could all see it. And we know this because it was all documented. In 1974, the experiment was filmed by a Canadian TV crew for a documentary called Philip, the Imaginary Ghost. Some of that footage still exists and you can find it online today. I'm going to attempt to insert it here. Please pray for me because the copyright gods have been against me in the past. So if I'm not able to play it, it shows the group laughing wide-eyed as the table raps, thuds, and tilts in front of them. The Psychoencyclopedia, which archives data from the Society for Psychical Research, includes detailed notes from the sessions describing how Philip would respond with knocks, move objects, and even sometimes follow commands like dimming lights or making rapping sounds on request. If Philip was completely fictional, what was actually doing the knocking? But it actually gets weirder. Philip began giving answers that weren't even part of his story. When asked questions about English history, events the group hadn't written into his backstory, he sometimes gave accurate historical responses. Information the participants later verified but hadn't consciously known themselves. So was Philip actually developing intelligence? Or were they collectively pulling information from somewhere else, maybe from a shared subconscious that we all have access to? Skeptics suggested the knocks and movements were caused by ideomotor movement, subtle unconscious muscle actions similar to how a Ouija board planchette moves. But there's a few problems with this theory, though. Ideomotor movement doesn't typically cause a 100-pound table to tilt on command, and it doesn't explain the coordinated way the responses happened. The table tilting phenomena was rhythmic, not random. The footage and reports describe the table lifting in time with questions and sometimes in time with songs. This rhythmic coordination is one of the biggest anomalies because it acted like an intelligent being keeping time. This rhythmic behavior is not consistent with ideomotor movement at all. These movements are supposed to be micro, subtle, and just totally unconscious, kind of accidental. They don't coordinate in time with music. There were also reports of temperature drops, flickering lights, and a faint mist forming near the table. That happens in my haunted house, and it's one of the weirder things that happens here. But none of that was scientifically measured. The team didn't use EMF detectors or temperature sensors. This was the early 1970s, so they were relying mostly on direct observation. The lack of proper instruments and a lab setting leaves gaps in the data, but even with that, the experiment was extraordinary. Encouraged by the success, the team decided to see if they could replicate it with other imaginary characters, and they did. They created several new entities, a French-Canadian spy named Lilith, a medieval alchemist named Sebastian, and even a futuristic being called Axel from the year 2500. Each time, the same phenomena reappeared: knocks and table movements and strange lights. Not every replication was as dramatic as Philip, but they all produced observable results. When skeptics outside the group tried to repeat the experiment under stricter lab conditions, results were mixed. Some got faint responses and others got nothing at all. The consistency seemed to depend on the group's energy and emotional connection, not on the physical variables. Dr. Owen himself said that Philip only appeared when everyone was in a good mood, laughing, engaged, and connected with each other. If anyone in the room was tense or skeptical, Philip would just go silent. That's an interesting detail because it implies that whatever this was, psychokinesis or collective imagination, it was powered by emotion. This idea is something that's seen over and over again with psi phenomena. The manifestation of the phenomena relies heavily on emotion and belief. Early psi testing throughout the mid 20th century took place at Duke University's parapsychology lab under J.B. Rhine. They noticed that subjects who produced the most consistent ESP or psychokinetic results were people who could easily slip into states of playful imagination. Children, in particular, often performed better on card guessing or dice influence experiments because they approached it as a game rather than a test.
Now, from a psychological point of view, there are several considerations. First is, I have to ask myself, what are the psychological conditions necessary to produce this phenomenon? Now, it seems to me that the group is in a childlike creativity. This is brought on by the playing and by the singing and the humor. The group lets their hair down. As opposed to the adult who says, this phenomenon can't be done because it's against the laws of physics, the child simply says, if I want to do it, it can be done.
When the environment felt pressured or analytical, results dropped sharply. But when the atmosphere was fun and lighthearted and more about imaginative play, the odds-defying outcomes reappeared. This strongly suggests that psi might be linked to creativity and intuition in the way that daydreaming or playing make-believe does. The group of adults in the Philip experiment had relearned how to play pretend and somehow made it real. There are some interesting aspects to the story that not a lot of people mention. The Philip experiment wasn't just manifestation, it was social synchronization. In long-term group dynamics, something called interpersonal entrainment happens, and that's where heart rates, micromovements, breathing, and emotional states all sync. It's been documented in choirs, classrooms, group meditations, psychic mediums, and even military units when they're tight-knit. When people enter this synchronized state, they develop a collective cognition, which can behave differently than individual cognition. Some parapsychologists suggested that Philip wasn't a thought form of one mind, that maybe he was a thought form of a collective consciousness on a small scale. That's why he only appeared when the group was synchronized. If one person broke the emotional sync, Philip stopped, which is what separates this phenomenon from being an actual ghost. Philip also answered questions the group didn't consciously know. So the original reports note that some answers Philip gave were historically accurate even though the team didn't research them and the information wasn't in Philip's backstory. Participants later admitted they didn't even know those facts confirmed by Philip. This raises three interesting possibilities. The first is subconscious information retrieval. Maybe someone knew the fact, but they forgot they knew it. It could also be multiple subconscious minds pooling information from the collective consciousness, or it could be that the tulpa essentially broke loose and the entity stabilized itself, and maybe it accessed information that the creators didn't consciously provide. More on tulpas in a bit. This is why the experiment freaked people out. They didn't expect the entity to develop intellectual autonomy. But if you're like me, you might be wondering, how exactly did Philip give detailed answers? Well, every answer Philip gave was delivered through knocks or table taps. There was no voice, there was no writing or channeling, no mediums at any point in the original experiment. Philip communicated through very simple yes-no code, where one knock was yes and two knocks were no. On occasion, sequences of knocks represented numbers or spelled out letters in a slow, clunky alphabet. Later in the experiment, once the table began tilting, the group used tilts or taps in place of the knocks. But all the answers were physical, not verbal. So how could he give accurate historical information through such a limited system? The group would ask yes or no questions about real historical facts. For example, they would say something like, "Philip, were you alive during the Civil War?" Early experiments used a basic A to Z alphabet similar to a verbal Ouija board. They'd say A, B, C, and then wait for a knock on the chosen letter. They didn't do this too often because it was so time consuming and easy to lose track. But when they did use it, they sometimes got abbreviated or single word responses that seemed historically plausible. Later, participants would research the historical references and discover that the answers matched events, even though they never wrote those details into his fictional biography. And that's what really unsettled them. If a belief can animate an invented ghost, then where does the line between imagination and reality actually end? Eventually, after several years, the group disbanded and they stopped meeting. Philip faded into the dusty corners of parapsychology, filed away with the other strange one off experiments that nobody knows what to do with. Years later, in interviews, Iris Owen still couldn't fully explain what happened. She passed away in 2009, and to this day, no one from the original team has ever retracted their account or claimed it was a hoax. So, what did they actually create? From a psychological perspective, maybe it was a perfect storm of imagination and expectation, and this would show the mind's power to influence physical perception. But from a metaphysical one, maybe they really did summon something. Not Philip Aylesford, but something else. Some parapsychologists believe that intense focus and group intention can create what's called a thought form, or in Tibetan mysticism, a tulpa. A tulpa is a being created purely by thought. It begins as imagination, but through repeated attention and emotional investment, it can become self-aware. It's the exact process the Toronto group followed. And if you've ever looked into modern tulpa communities online, you'll find people who claim to consciously create separate entities within their minds. They sometimes cite the Philip experiment as proof that focused imagination can cross this boundary between thought and reality. Traditional Tibetan mystics warn that tulpas can become independent, that once the creator has fed it enough imagination and emotional weight, it can step outside its creator's control. In old accounts, monks described tulpas that began as harmless companions but grew restless, mischievous, and even sometimes hostile. One famous mystic, Alexandra David Neal, wrote about creating a tulpa of a jolly monk who eventually, quote, thinned into a darker, more malevolent figure until she had to perform rituals to dissolve it. The idea is that thought, when fed with enough focus, can take on its own momentum. And once it does, you can't always predict what happens. What makes this even stranger is how modern internet culture has unintentionally created this exact process. Communities online, especially in the early 2010s, began consciously creating tulpas as mental companions. Some people claim their tulpas had their own voices, personalities, and emotional reactions. Some reported that these entities even disagreed with them or argued with them or showed signs of having their own desires outside of what the creator wanted. Whether psychological or paranormal, it's eerily similar to what mystics described centuries ago. And then there are the accidental tulpas. One of the most famous modern examples is Slender Man. He's a completely fictional horror character that was created for a Photoshop contest on an internet forum in 2009. But within weeks of his creation, thousands of people were writing stories, drawing artwork, and imagining sightings. The lore grew so fast and so intensely that for some, Slender Man actually felt real, especially to children. People reported seeing him in the woods, in dreams, or during sleep paralysis, and entire communities claimed emotional experiences that felt like encounters. A fictional entity created by one single user absorbed so much collective imagination that it kind of went into that same liminal space that tulpas live. Not exactly real, but not exactly not real either. And in one of the most disturbing examples of how belief can override reality, two young girls in Wisconsin carried out a violent attack in 2014. They actually believed they were making a sacrifice to Slender Man. Just like Slender Man, Philip was fictional. Everyone knew that, but they fed him with emotion, beliefs, and a story. And eventually something started responding, and it behaved like its own personality. Once enough people believe in something, even if it starts as a lie, it begins to act like it wants to be real. Rumors within the Toronto parapsychology community say Owens kept additional observations that were too out there to publish in the 1970s. His notes supposedly included voices, flashes of light not caught on camera, emotional waves passing through the group, and inexplicable shadows. But the existence of Owens' personal notes have never surfaced. According to secondary reports and interviews that summarize these comments, George Owen admitted that the experiment raised unsettling implications about consciousness, especially the possibility that humans could create unintended psychic entities simply by thinking too hard. He reportedly said something to the effect of, quote, "If the mind can create Philip, what else has it created?"
The experiment on Philip has been a very exciting thing for me because it has taken an abstract thought of mine and made it into a concrete experiment.
What happened in that Toronto basement 50 years ago still hasn't been fully explained. Was it a case of group hypnosis, maybe a shared delusion, or did a handful of people, through imagination alone, manifest something real into their own reality? And if they did, where did it go? Did they just stop believing in it? And maybe that's what they accidentally proved, that reality is a participator, that what we focus on, we feed energy to, and that every time we tell a story, every time we believe something hard enough, we give it life. Philip serves as a reminder that what you water grows. He's a reflection of what we're capable of when we really give it our energy. And if this is something you're interested in, that is conscious creation of your own reality, not creating creepy tulpas, head on over to my website. I have a wait list right now for my conscious creation course, and if you sign up ahead of time, no money down or anything like that, it's just a waiting list, but if you sign up for that, you will get a discount when the course goes live. So all the information for that is in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Wicked Mysterious. I will see you again next week, and stay mysterious.